Welcome to the second DraftSight tutorial. In this tutorial, we will be going over entering coordinates into DraftSight, as well as how to draw the line, rectangle, circle, arc, ellipse, and ellipse arc entities. Once you understand how to input coordinates into DraftSight's command window, learning how to draw entities will become much easier. So to begin, I will turn on the grid, and I've already zoomed into an area close to the coordinate symbol, the X and Y origin. I have also drawn a few guides to aid in understanding how coordinates work in DraftSight. DraftSight accepts the input of two types of coordinates, Cartesian coordinates and polar coordinates. In the Cartesian system, points are defined by the position on the X and Y axis. Cartesian coordinates are inputted using the following syntax, X, Y. For example, this point would be 1, 1. You are likely familiar with the X and Y coordinate system. X increases as you move to the right of the origin, and Y increases as you move up above the origin, and X decreases negatively as you move to the left of the origin. So let's draw a line from the coordinate 1, 1 to 1, 4. To draw a line, we can either click on the line tool from the toolbar or type the line command into the command window. Then we enter the coordinates of the start point, in this case 1, 1, to signify 1x, 1y. And as you can see, DraftSight has started a line at 1x and 1y. Now we'll type in the end point, the next point, which will be 1, 4. And as you can see, DraftSight drew a line from x1, y1 to x1, y4. At this point, we could hit enter to end the line, or we could type in the coordinates of the next point. Let's type in 3, 5 to draw another line. And now we can either hit enter to end the line or C, as you can see here, to close our drawing. I'll type in C and hit enter. As you can see, it closed our drawing, drawing a line from the end point, returning it back to the start point. The Cartesian coordinate system is very basic and familiar. Polar coordinates, however, may be less familiar. However, they're easy to learn. Polar coordinates are defined by a distance and an angle. And let me pull up an example file that I've created. Here you can see the polar grid. The 0 angle is a line running out of the origin to the right. This angle increases as we move counterclockwise. The distances are defined as their distance from the origin. For example, if we went a distance of 3 at a 45-degree angle, we would be specifying this point. Likewise, if we went a distance of 4 at a 90-degree angle, we would be specifying this point on the polar grid. Now that we've become familiar with the polar coordinate system, let's return to the drawing area and draw a few lines. First, we'll delete what we've already drawn. Now let's draw a line starting at the origin and going 5 units at 60 degrees. I'll select the line command from the toolbar. I'll type in my starting point, which would be 0, 0. Next, I will input the polar coordinates. The syntax for polar coordinates is the distance, the greater than symbol, and then the angle. So we would like to go 5 units at an angle of 60 degrees. And now our line has been drawn. We're 5 units at 60 degrees. I will now end this line. Next, I will draw a line, and I will use polar coordinates to specify both the start point and the end point. I'll type in the line command. I will start at a distance of 3 and a 45-degree angle. My line has been started, and I will draw to a distance of 5 at a 90-degree angle. Up until now, we have been using absolute coordinates. This means that all of the coordinates were related to only one location, the origin, and the origin remained always in the same place as an absolute. While it is good to understand how absolute coordinates work, you will likely not use them when you draw countertops. Instead, when you are given a drawing of a countertop, the dimensions are relative to each other. Dimensions are given from point A to point B, then from point B to point C, with each point relative to the previous. You probably do not receive dimensions that are measurements from an origin to point A, from the same origin to point B, then to point C, and so on. To specify to DraftSight that we desire to use relative coordinates, we simply need to add an ampersand or @ sign to the beginning of the coordinates that we enter into the command window. So now I will clean up some of the lines I have drawn. So now I will draw a line by selecting the line tool from the draw toolbar, and then I will select a start point. Next, I will type in coordinates relative to this location, and I will let DraftSight know I'm using relative coordinates by first typing in the ampersand. I will specify -1 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis, and then hit enter. As you can see, I drew a line to the left 1 unit. Now had I used the same coordinates without specifying that they were relative to my starting point, I would have ended up in a very different location. Let's try that. I will type in -1, 0 without the ampersand. And as you can see, it used coordinates relative to the origin, moving me 1 unit left of the origin. I will now type in U into the command window. As you can see, it is one of my options, and it will undo the line that I just drew. And I will finish up this line by drawing a rectangle using relative coordinates. The ampersand 0, 2. Then I will move to the right 1 unit, 1, 0. Then, to finish off the rectangle, I simply need to move down along the y-axis, and I don't need to have any movement on the x-axis. So I will type an ampersand 0 for x and -2 for the y-axis. And now I've closed my rectangle and I can delete this example. Now that we've seen how relative Cartesian coordinates work, we can move on to relative polar coordinates. First, I will start a line by selecting the line tool from the draw toolbar. Next, I will enter relative polar coordinates using the ampersand to designate them as relative coordinates and the polar coordinate syntax so the DraftSight knows I'm entering polar coordinates. So I'll use the ampersand. I will go from this position 3 units at 180 degrees. As we can see here on the polar grid, when I designate 3 units, I move 3 units, and 180 degrees means a line to the left. Next, I will go 4 units at 270 degrees. As you can see, 270 degrees means a line going down. And lastly, I will go 5 units at 53 degrees. And as you can see, 53 degrees brought me up back towards my starting point. And I'll hit enter to finish my line. To summarize, there are 4 ways to enter coordinates into DraftSight. Absolute Cartesian coordinates, which go along the x and y axes and specify coordinates relative to the origin, an absolute origin that never moves. There are absolute polar coordinates, which specify distances and angles from the origin. There are relative Cartesian coordinates, which specify distances relative to the end point of a line. And there are relative polar coordinates, which specify distances and angles relative to the end point of a previous line. Up until this point, we have only been entering whole numbers and integers, numbers such as 180 or -1. So let's take a look at entering rational numbers, numbers such as 1.25 or 10 and 13/16. The format for entering numbers with decimals is what we would expect it to be. We simply write the number, the decimal point, and then the rest of our number. I will select line from the draw toolbar. I'll start my line here. I'll type in ampersand 2.75 and I'll make it at a 0-degree angle and hit enter. As you can see, DraftSight drew a line 2 3/4 units long, 2.75. Next, let's create a line of the same length but by using fractions. For fractions such as 2 3/4, the syntax is very simple. Just enter the integer, a dash, the numerator, a slash, and then the denominator. For example, 2-3/4 for 2 3/4. Let me draw an example. I'll start a line here, then I will enter ampersand, then 2-3/4 for 2 3/4 at an angle of 0 and hit enter. And DraftSight has drawn a line at 2 3/4 units. If I wanted to draw a line only 3/4 units long, I would simply forego the first number and type in 3/4. Let me draw an example. At 3/4 at an angle of 0, and I'll hit enter, and DraftSight has drawn a line 3/4 units long. You can use multiple types of coordinates to draw a single entity. For example, you could start a line with absolute Cartesian coordinates and then end a line using relative polar coordinates. Now that you have seen the command window in use, I would like to go a little more in depth about the command window before we move on to other types of entities. First, when you see the colon, you know that the command window is ready for a new command, for example, line. If you don't see the colon, then just hit escape to cancel out of the current command. To repeat a command, just hit enter when you see the colon. And as you can see, DraftSight has prompted me to start a new line, which was the previous command I had entered. When you run a command, a list of available options will appear above the input area. The underlined letter is the shortcut for that option. For example, I ran the line command, and now I can choose the segment option by typing in S and hitting enter. The segment option creates only one line at a time. To return to continuous lines, all I have to do is type in the C key and hit enter. As you interact with the command, you will notice that the options may change. For example, after you execute a command, and I will execute one now, I'll start a line at 0, 0, and now I will create a second point at 5, 5. As you can see, it's drawn a line, and now a new option has appeared, undo. If I type in the U command, this will undo my second point, and I can draw it again if I wish to do so. If you would like to know more about what commands are available and what they do, go to Help, and then select the Index tab, and then search for Command Reference, and then select commands listed in alphabetical order. Now you can scroll down to the command that you wish to learn more about. I'll scroll down to the line command. Here we can see more about the line command. In the second column are aliases. These are shortcuts for each command. The line command's alias is L. Instead of typing line, L-I-N-E, into the command window, we can simply type in L instead. And if we click on the line command, we will see more information about how the line command works and its options. Now let's move on to the next entity type, the rectangle. To create a rectangle, you can either select the rectangle icon from the Draw toolbar, or you can type rectangle into the command window. I'll be typing in REC, which is the alias for the rectangle command, and then I'll hit enter. Next, I need to specify the start corner. I will start the rectangle at 1, 1. Now I can specify the opposite corner. To do so, I'm going to use relative Cartesian coordinates. I would like to create a rectangle that is 5 units by 3 units, so all I need to do is type in 5, 3 after my ampersand and hit enter. Now I've created a rectangle that is 5 units by 3 units. Now we can check out some of the options that the rectangle has. To do so, I will specify the rectangle tool, and before I specify my first corner, I will look at the options. One of the options is for a fillet. I'll type in the F button, and currently the default fillet is 0. I will type in a new radius of 0.25 and hit enter. Then I will specify my starting point and my end point, and as you can see, my rectangle has filleted corners. It is important to note that since I set the fillet at 0.25, that became the new default. So any rectangles I would draw later on will also have filleted edges at a radius of 0.25. So to change that, after selecting the rectangle tool, I can go back in, I can type in the F option, and set the new radius's default to 0. Now I can start a new rectangle without filleted corners. Now that we've seen how to draw rectangles, I can clean up and we can move on to drawing circles. To draw a circle, you can either type in C, which is alias for circle. You can click on the circle icon on the toolbar, or you can go to Draw and then select Circle from the menu bar. And as you can see, there are many ways to create circles. For the sake of this tutorial, I will only be showing how to draw circles using a center point and a radius, or a center point and a diameter. If you'd like to learn more, please consult the command reference in the help file. So, let's draw a circle. First, I'll type in C into the command window. Then to specify the center point, I will use Cartesian absolute coordinates of 2, 2. And now I will specify the radius, which I will make a radius of 1. And there's my circle. Next, let's create a circle using a center point and a diameter. I will enter the C command to start my circle. Then I'll use the mouse to select the center of my circle. And then I will type in D to select the D option for diameter. Now I'll type in the diameter that I wish to use, which will be 3, and hit enter. And as you can see, it made a circle with a 3-unit diameter. So as you can see, circles are also very easy to create. You just simply need to find the center point and then enter the radius or diameter. Now that we've created circles, I'll clean up our area and we can move on to arcs. To draw an arc, you can either type in A, the alias for arc, into the command window. You can select the arc button from the draw toolbar, or you can go to draw and select arc. Here you will see the many types of arcs. For the sake of this tutorial, I will be explaining how to create arcs using a start, end, and radius, or by specifying 3 points. Before drawing an arc, I'm going to be creating a rectangle to help as a visual aid. Next, we can create an arc from a start point, end point, and radius. So I'll type A, the alias of arc, into the command line, hit enter. I will specify my start point. Next, I will choose the E option to specify the end point, which I will do. Then I will type in the R option to specify the radius. Now you'll notice there is a line coming from my arc. That line will not be drawn when I click. That line is used to set the length of the radius. As I stretch the line, the arc changes as the radius gets larger and larger. If I would like, I can type in the radius into the command window. I'll type in 4.25 and hit enter. Now I've created an arc with a radius of 4.25 units. When specifying the starting point and ending point of an arc, it is important to remember that the polar grid works counterclockwise. Because it works backwards, you need to start on the right side for your starting point and move to the left for your ending point. Otherwise, your arc may form backwards. Let me demonstrate. I'll create another arc by going to Draw, Arc, Start, End, Radius. And this time, instead of specifying the start point on the right side, I'll specify it on the left side. Then I'll move to the right side. And now, as I enlarge my radius, we see that the arc is concave, not convex as I had desired. Again, this is because the polar grid works counterclockwise. Let me demonstrate with an example. I will draw an arc starting at 0 and then increasing to 90 degrees. As my center point, I will use the center of the grid. So as you can see, the angle of the arc was 90 degrees. I went from 0 to 90, which made it a 90-degree angle. Next, I will create an arc at the bottom of the polar grid. My arc will also be 90 degrees, so I'll start at 225. This is my starting point. Now I'll move over to my end point, which will be 315. Because I started on the left, my arc will protrude out towards the bottom. There's no way I can get it to move above, because my starting point was at 225, and I added 90 degrees from 225. So my arc will go counterclockwise until it reaches 315 degrees. Now let's return to the drawing window. Next, I'll clean up and create an arc using 3 points. But first I'm going to create a construction line. A construction line is simply a temporary entity that's used as an aid to create another entity. When construction is finished, the temporary line is removed. Now I'm going to select line, and I want to create an arc that is half a unit above my box. So I'll go up half a unit and I will click, and I'm going to hit enter to close my line. Next I will go to draw arc 3 points. I will select this corner, my furthest point, and then my ending point. And as you can see, I've created an arc that is 1/2 of a unit above my box. So now I can delete my construction line. Now we can move on to ellipses. First, I will clean up our drawing area. I'm going to leave the box because we'll be using that. If we go to draw and ellipse, we'll see that there are two different methods of drawing an ellipse, either by specifying the center and then the major radius and the minor radius, or by specifying the axis and an endpoint for the minor radius. You can also specify the ellipse command here in the draw toolbar, or you can type in EL, which is the alias for ellipse, and hit enter in the command window. First, we will be drawing an ellipse based on its axis and endpoint, the endpoint of its minor axis. So I will click here, here, and now I can decide the height of the minor axis, which I will select as this. Next, we can draw an ellipse by specifying its center, the length of its minor radius, and the length of its major radius. So I'll delete this ellipse. I will type in the EL ellipse command again, and now I will type in the C option to specify the center. I will specify here as my center, my starting point. Next, I will select my endpoint. And lastly, the other axis endpoint, which will be here. Those are the two ways of drawing ellipses. One is useful if you know the box in which your ellipse should fit in. The other is useful if you know the center point of your ellipse and the length of its major and minor radiuses. Now we can move on to the ellipse arc, the last entity type that we will be looking at in these tutorials. I'll move over here. I'll select the ellipse arc from the draw toolbar. The first thing I need to do is specify the axis start point. So similar to this ellipse, we need to make an axis. Here will be our starting point. I will select this as our end point. And then it would like us to specify the other axis end point, which I will place here, 1/2 of a unit above the rectangle. Then now we need to specify the start angle. When specifying the angle, it is important to remember that the polar grid works counterclockwise. So if we would like our ellipse to be on the top of the rectangle, we will need to specify on the right side of the center. So I will click here, and then I can now draw my ellipse around to the other corner and select it as the end angle. And now our ellipse arc is complete. This will conclude the drawing tutorial video.